If this data is accurate, the championship fight might already be over. Red Bull just finished preseason testing with a completely new in-house Ford power unit. High risk. Massive pressure. Zero room for failure. And instead of struggling, the RB22 walked away running 12 degrees cooler than its main rivals. 12 degrees. That unlocks tighter bodywork, lower drag, higher straight-line efficiency. But that's only the surface. Because while other teams were losing electric deployment at the end of Bahrain's longest straight, Verstappen wasn't. No clipping. No fade. Roughly 15 km per hour faster without drag reduction system. And here's the part nobody expected. After preseason officially ended, Max focused on extending that electric deployment even further. Not more aggressive. Longer. If that calibration holds over a full race distance, overtaking the RB22 becomes incredibly difficult. This is not a small upgrade. This is structural dominance. Stay with me, because what we're about to break down explains why this advantage is almost impossible to copy mid-season, and why the first Grand Prix could confirm something the rest of the grid does not want to admit. Preseason testing is finished. No more experiments. No more hiding behind unknown fuel loads. What we saw in Bahrain was the final version before the real fight begins. And Red Bull did something very deliberate. They did not chase the fastest single lap. They chased control. In Barcelona, the RB22 looked calm from the very first outing. No violent bouncing down the straight. No unstable rear underbraking. No awkward delay between combustion and electric power. Verstappen described the hybrid transition as almost seamless. That detail matters more than headline lap times. Because when the power delivery feels natural, the driver can lean on it lap after lap. Then came Bahrain. The hydraulic issue created drama. Hours lost in the garage. Speculation about tight packaging and reliability risks. For a moment, it looked like vulnerability. But the response exposed something bigger. The following day, Verstappen completed a long race simulation with almost no lap time variation. Lap after lap, the RB22 stayed inside a narrow performance window. No sudden tire drop. No visible clipping at the end of the straight. That kind of consistency is not luck. It points to thermal stability. And thermal stability changes everything. If the Ford engine runs cooler, you can close the bodywork tighter. If the bodywork is tighter, drag decreases. If drag decreases, straight-line speed improves without sacrificing balance in the corners. But the real advantage was not just cooling. It was energy deployment. While other teams began to lose electric assistance before the braking zone, the RB22 kept pushing. Full torque. No fade. That translates into superior positioning before every heavy braking zone. And once you arrive at that braking zone, another advantage appears. The anti-dive suspension. Under heavy braking, the RB22 barely pitches forward. The floor stays stable. The aerodynamic platform remains consistent. That allows Verstappen to brake later and defend more aggressively. Each layer supports the next. Cooling supports packaging. Packaging reduces drag. Reduced drag enhances sustained deployment. Sustained deployment protects track position. Stable suspension protects tire life. Tire life protects strategy. This is not a collection of upgrades. It is an integrated system. And systems are extremely difficult to copy in the middle of a season. But here is where it becomes even more serious. After preseason officially ended, Verstappen focused on extending electric deployment duration. Not increasing peak power. Extending how long the boost lasts. Even a fraction of a second deeper into the straight changes overtaking dynamics completely. Because in modern Formula 1, passing depends on closing speed before the braking zone. If the car ahead never runs out of energy, the closing speed disappears. And if you cannot close, you cannot attack. Now imagine that advantage over an entire race distance. Lap after lap. Stint after stint. The pressure builds on the chasing driver. Mistakes appear. Strategy risks increase. And slowly, the race slips away. Preseason testing may be over. But what Verstappen validated in those final sessions was not just speed. It was sustainability. If that sustainability holds under full race conditions, the RB22 does not need to dominate Saturday. It only needs to control Sunday. And control on Sunday is how championships are built. Now here is where everything either becomes dominance, or simply promise. Because there is a difference between being fast in testing and being untouchable in racing. Testing is controlled. Races are chaotic. Heavy fuel loads. Dirty air. Full deployment cycles. Brake temperatures climbing. Tire degradation accelerating. If the RB22 behaves the same way under those conditions, then what we saw in preseason was not a glimpse. It was a warning. Imagine the opening laps of the first Grand Prix. The field compresses into turn 1. Airflow becomes turbulent. Energy systems are stressed immediately. Most cars begin managing, lifting slightly, protecting temperatures. But if the Red Bull continues to deploy without clipping, if it exits the final corner with sustained electric torque lap after lap, then overtaking becomes a theoretical concept rather than a practical one. And once track position is secured, the next phase begins. Tire management. During long runs in Bahrain, the RB22 showed almost no dramatic drop-off. The lap times remained stable, consistent, predictable. That predictability is lethal, because strategy relies on understanding when a rival will fade. If the rival does not fade, your strategy collapses. Undercuts become weaker. Overcuts become risky. Fuel saving becomes unnecessary. And suddenly, Red Bull is not reacting. They are dictating. Now think about the psychological impact. If you are chasing a car that does not clip on the straight, that brakes later without instability, that preserves its tires deeper into the stint, you begin to overdrive. You push harder into braking zones. You attack traction zones more aggressively. And small mistakes appear. That is how small performance advantages snowball into race control. And here is the crucial detail. Other teams cannot simply bolt on this advantage. They would need to rethink cooling philosophy, reconfigure hybrid deployment software, rebalance suspension geometry, and validate everything under race conditions, all while competing every weekend. That takes months, sometimes years. Meanwhile, Red Bull is refining, shaving weight, improving reliability margins, optimizing deployment curves further. Because once the baseline is strong, refinement becomes easier. This is how championships quietly tilt. Not with a dramatic 1-second advantage, but with relentless control. Lap after lap, race after race. And if the first few Grands Prix confirm what preseason suggested, then the narrative will shift quickly. From "can they be beaten" to "how do we limit the damage?" That is the moment structural dominance becomes real. So when the lights go out for the first race, do not just watch the start. Watch the end of the longest straight. Watch lap 20. Watch the final stint. If the RB22 is still composed, still deploying, still stable under braking, then what Verstappen tested after preseason was not an experiment. It was confirmation. Confirmation that Red Bull built not just a fast car, but a system. And systems, once perfected, are incredibly difficult to dismantle mid-season. The rest of the grid may understand what is happening. The real question is whether they have enough time to respond. And this is where the season could quietly be decided, long before anyone says it out loud. Because if the RB22 confirms its preseason behavior across the first 3 races, momentum will shift in a way that is incredibly hard to reverse. Not because the car is dramatically faster over 1 lap, but because it removes variability. Variability is what gives rivals hope. A bad stint, a sudden clip on the straight, unexpected tire degradation. Those are openings. If the RB22 eliminates those openings, then every race becomes predictable in one key way. Red Bull will always be there. Now think about development pressure. After the first race, every factory goes into analysis mode. They compare top speed traces. They examine deployment curves. They study braking stability. And they try to isolate the secret. But what if there is no single secret? What if it is simply integration? Cooling working in harmony with packaging. Packaging reducing drag without overheating. Deployment software synchronized with suspension stability. Tire management aligned with aerodynamic balance. That cannot be copied with one upgrade. It requires a redesign philosophy. And redesigning philosophy mid-season is almost impossible. So what happens instead? Teams gamble. They push updates early. They introduce aggressive floor revisions. They stretch their cooling margins. And sometimes, that introduces instability. That is when mistakes begin. A reliability issue here. A setup window too narrow there. And slowly, the points gap grows. Not explosively. Quietly. Relentlessly. This is the difference between being fast and being sustainable. Fast can be matched. Sustainable pace, integrated across systems, is far harder to dismantle. And remember, what Verstappen focused on after preseason was not headline speed. It was extending deployment duration. It was confirming that the boost does not fade under heavy fuel. It was ensuring braking stability does not destroy tire life. He was validating endurance. Because endurance over a 20-plus race calendar wins championships. Now imagine mid-season. If Red Bull holds a comfortable lead, they no longer need radical upgrades. They refine. They optimize. They protect reliability. Meanwhile, rivals must take risks just to close the gap. And risk under pressure often creates volatility. Volatility costs points. This is how dominance becomes psychological. Drivers begin to feel that even perfect laps are not enough. Engineers begin to question their models. Strategy teams overthink scenarios. And Red Bull simply executes. So when the first few races unfold, the real signal will not be dramatic overtakes. It will be absence. Absence of clipping. Absence of tire collapse. Absence of instability under braking. If those absences remain consistent, then what was exposed after preseason is clear. The RB22 is not relying on one magic component. It is relying on balance. And balance, once perfected, is extremely difficult to disrupt. The championship will not be decided in one moment. It will tilt, race by race, lap by lap. And if that tilt begins early, the rest of the grid may realize something uncomfortable. They are not chasing a breakthrough. They are chasing a foundation. And foundations are the hardest things to shake once they are already set. And here is the final layer most people are not ready to confront. Because if the RB22 truly maintains this balance across different circuit types, then we are not talking about a strong start. We are talking about a season-defining platform. Think about the calendar ahead. High-speed circuits where drag efficiency matters. Stop-start tracks where braking stability defines overtaking chances. Hot climates where cooling margins are punished. Street circuits where traction and energy recovery become critical. If the same core characteristics remain consistent everywhere, then rivals lose their one advantage: track-specific hope. Normally, teams survive by targeting certain venues. A track that suits their aero concept. A circuit that hides their weaknesses. But if the RB22 is not sensitive to those variations, if it remains thermally stable in heat, if it preserves tires on abrasive surfaces, if it continues deploying electric torque at the end of long straights, then there is no obvious weakness to attack. And when there is no weakness, frustration grows. Frustration leads to overdevelopment. Overdevelopment leads to correlation issues. Correlation issues cost time. Time costs championships. This is why what Verstappen tested after preseason was so calculated. He was not searching for extra tenths in qualifying. He was confirming that the system survives stress, extended deployment cycles, heavy fuel simulations, brake temperature consistency, floor stability under load. Because if one of those elements breaks down, the illusion collapses. But if they hold together, the advantage compounds. Now imagine the mid-season phase. If Red Bull builds an early points cushion, their entire approach shifts. They no longer need to chase risky gains. They optimize reliability, reduce weight incrementally, fine-tune energy recovery curves. Meanwhile, the rest of the grid is forced into aggressive upgrades just to remain close. And aggressive upgrades introduce instability, a narrow setup window, unexpected tire wear, energy overheating, small cracks that appear under pressure. This is how a championship quietly becomes one-sided. Not through dramatic domination every weekend, but through relentless control of race dynamics. Control of straight-line speed, control of braking zones, control of tire life, control of strategy windows. And once one team controls all those variables simultaneously, the rest are reacting rather than dictating. That is the true danger. Because reacting burns resources. It burns confidence. It burns momentum. So when the season unfolds, do not just watch for spectacular overtakes. Watch for consistency. Watch for the absence of clipping. Watch for the absence of tire collapse. Watch for the RB22 exiting the final corner on lap 30 with the same authority it had on lap 3. If that pattern repeats, race after race, then what was exposed after preseason becomes undeniable. Verstappen was not testing speed. He was validating sustainability. And sustainable performance is the most powerful weapon in modern Formula One. Because speed can be matched. But a perfectly integrated system, already optimized before the season even begins. That is something the rest of the grid may spend the entire year trying to understand. And by the time they do, it might already be too late.